Hi everyone, welcome to the channel of Political Science Tutorials. In this video, we will try to understand the theory of feminism. When we talk about feminism, broadly it means both thought and action towards ending the hierarchy of sexes and thereby to achieve gender equality. So to understand feminism, we have to go through the thoughts of different feminist thinkers of different times as well as from different countries and different movements. Going through this, we will be able to understand about the ideology called feminism. Any theory or ideology we know draw its basic assumptions or beliefs. Feminism as an ideology is associated with two basic beliefs, and these are: women are disadvantaged because of their sex, and second is this disadvantage can and should be overthrown. There are many definitions about feminism, but a definition from the Collins Dictionary of Sociology provides a comprehensive understanding of feminism. Let us read the definition. According to this definition of feminism, it can be understood in number of ways. First, it is a holistic theory concerned with the nature of women's global oppression and subordination to men. Second point is a sociopolitical theory and practice which aims to free all women from male supremacy and exploitation. Third point is it is a social movement encompassing strategic confrontations with the sex class system. Fourth point is it is an ideology which stands in dialectical opposition to all misogynist ideologies and practices. So, from this definition, we can say that feminism is a holistic theory, or it considers the subordination of women as a global phenomenon. Secondly, it is not only a theory but practice which aims to free all women from any type of male supremacy and domination. Third point asserts that the society is based on sex class system, and feminism is a social movement of strategic confrontations with the sex class system at its center. And another important thing is that this theory stands against misogynist or all women hater ideologies and practices. There are many issues in feminism, but it is clear that mainly for what causes feminism stand and against which causes it is ready to fight. Basically, feminists highlighted what they see as a political relationship between the sexes, the supremacy of men and the subjection of women in most societies, if not in all societies. Now we will discuss about three key issues or main issues feminism deals with, and these are patriarchy, the sex-gender distinction, and critique of the public-private dichotomy and different feminist positions on these issues. Now let us try to understand what is patriarchy. We know that in any society, more or less, women are deprived of ownership of productive resources, and as they have no control over direct productive resources and no ownership of land or capital or anything, so their only option is to be entirely dependent on men. Again, if we see societal rules and norms, actually these rules and norms restrict women's mobility and which also confine women within strictly defined space, and they are entirely denied to develop their individual capabilities. Kate Millett, one important feminist, argues that throughout the history, the relationship between the sexes has been one of domination and subordination, in which men have exercised domination in two forms, through social authority and economic force. The emphasis of our analysis is on patriarchy as a system. And what this system do? This system is to establish men's power over women. And this domination is not all individual phenomenon, but is part of a structure. If we read a quote by the historian Gerda Lerner, it will be quite clear to us what is patriarchy. She defines patriarchy thus: the manifestation and institutionalizations of male dominance over women and children in the family, and the extension of male dominance over women in society in general. It implies that men hold power in all the important institutions in society, and that women are deprived of access to such power. Thus, patriarchy helps in two ways to deprive or oppress women as a system. First, through social authority, which control their sexuality and mobility. Second, as they have no ownership or control on production resources, the result is economic dependence and all type of oppressions. But here we have to keep in mind that every individual man is not always in a dominant position, and that every individual woman is always in a subordinate position. It actually means that under patriarchy, there is an ideology that men are superior to women, that women are the property of men, and that women should be under control of men. Second common ground is that feminists differentiated between sex and gender. They referred sex is to nature as gender is to culture. For feminists, sex is to nature as gender is to culture. We know that biologically it cannot be ignored that there is a distinction between male and female, and they call it sex, and which is determined by nature. These are distinguished naturally. But the concept of gender, they relate it with culture, which is artificially created. And gender is indicating the vast range of cultural meanings attached to that basic differences. Now let us see how they describe the process of artificially constructed concept of gender from childhood. From early childhood, boys and girls are trained in appropriate gender-specific forms of behavior in play, dress, and so on. This training is continuous and most of the time subtle, but when necessary can involve punishments to bring about conformity. Or it means when girls and boys are acting accordingly, the set of gender-specific form of behavior, they are considered as appropriate. But when they start to act differently, even punishments are used to control their behavior. So, feminists argue that sex-specific qualities like bravery and confidence as masculine, and sensitivity and shyness as feminine, and the value that society attributes to them are produced by a range of institutions and beliefs that socialize boys and girls differently. As Simone de Beauvoir put it, one is not born but becomes women. Means with the process of socialization, women become women as a gender. Third common point is public-private dichotomy. We know that the liberal theory demanded equality and justice for all. But feminists saw it as politics of difference. They attacked liberalism as an inadequate vehicle for advancing the social role of women because it fails to recognize the significance of gender differences. Liberals excluded women from the concept of equality and justice. Rather, they developed a conception of personhood that is dominated by male traits and characteristics. Politics exists whenever and wherever social conflict is found. Kate Millett, for example, defined politics as power-structured relationships, arrangements whereby one group of persons is controlled by another. The relationship between government and its citizens is therefore clearly political. But so is the relationship between employers and workers within a firm, and also relationships in the family between husbands and wives and between parents and children. How she explained this theory? The individual was the adult male head of the household, and thus his right to interfere the matters within family, and this included his rights over those in his control in the private realm, women, children, servants. Thus, operation within the family was rendered invisible to political theory. After discussing what is feminism, now let us take a brief account on how the concept of feminism as an ideology developed. Then we will discuss about 4 waves of feminism. First, we have to keep in mind that in our discussion, our main starting point will be from 18th century Enlightenment period. Still, it will not be fair when we are discussing about feminism if we totally ignore the strong but scattered and isolated voices of women who fought for their rights and stood against the unequal treatment by society against the half population before Enlightenment era. If we look back to the recorded history, it was in 3rd century BCE, Roman women resisted attempts to repeal laws limiting women's use of expensive goods. Resisting against authority was also not so easy. Still, Roman women organized themselves and blocked the Capitoline Hill to protest against these laws. Cato, the administrator, got scared because in his view, as soon as they begin to be your equals, they will have become your superiors. It means system or authority should deny the equal status of women. And we cannot ignore that this fear still exists. With the changing mindset of society and many movements, the overall scenario has been changed. But the traits of this fear can be traced more or less in any society, and for this reason, feminists are fighting for. With time and with different perceptions, the fights are going on in different forms. The incident of Rome is only an example. This type of incidents happened in different countries in past history where women protested against their inferior status in society, and still it is going on. Now let us move on to in 15th century. In early 15th century, a major debate was held on the women question. One of the most active participants in this debate was Christine de Pisan, the first professional author and a woman to boot, and she, along with Jean Garçon, Chancellor of the University of Paris, and others, challenged the misogynistic texts, ideas, as well as broader societal notions of womanhood. Christine de Pisan's book, The City of Ladies, published in Italy in the year 1405. Her writings conceived many of the ideas of modern feminism. Her participation in the debate is a reason that Christine is often called one of the first feminists. In her poems and prose texts, she would also argue for the rights of women and found opportunities to celebrate women's achievements. She advocated for women's right to education and political influence. And there were so many who advocated for equal status and justice for women. But it was not until the 19th century that an organized women's movement developed. Now we will discuss about how an organized movement of feminism developed. We have to keep in mind that though the concepts of feminism has been used to address the suppression and oppression of women from early ages, but as a political term, feminism is a 20th century invention and has only been a familiar part of everyday language since the 1960s, in which meaning we use it today. Now we will try to understand the history of feminism as an ideology in 4 waves. Today we can see that as an ideology, feminism has a global appeal. But whether as a social movement or as a systematic thought, it started its journey from the West. We know that French Revolution promoted the famous slogan, liberty, equality and fraternity. After the revolution, the Declaration of the Rights of the Man and of the Citizen was drafted and finalized, which defined French citizenship after the revolution of 1789. But the declaration pointedly failed to address the legal status of women, or you can say this declaration ignored the equal status for women. Female intellectuals of the Enlightenment were quick to point out this lack of inclusivity and the limited scope of reformist rhetoric about liberty, equality and natural rights be applied to both sexes. Olympe de Gouges, a playwright, and Wollstonecraft, the author of the book The Vindication of the Rights of Women, were prominent among them. We all know that French philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau's political theory was one of the theoretical guides behind the French Revolution. But he portrayed women as silly and frivolous creatures born to be subordinate to men. Now let us come to the point of Wollstonecraft, who is considered as first modern feminist, and why so she is considered. The first modern text of feminism is usually taken to be Mary Wollstonecraft's The Vindication of the Rights of Women, which was published in the year 1792. This is an important book in the literature of feminism. Already mentioned that Swiss-born French philosopher Rousseau portrayed women as silly and frivolous creatures born to be subordinate to men. Wollstonecraft totally disagreed with Rousseau at this point. Her publication dedicated an entire chapter in response to Rousseau's intent of paternalistic notions on the exclusion of women. Her work communicated the belief that the differences between the sexes was an opportunity for men to benefit, validating the association of females with irrationality as a justification to subordinate and direct them for male intent. In male-dominated society, there is a notion that women's existence is only to please men. Wollstonecraft challenged this notion and proposed that women and men be given equal opportunities, whether it is in education or work or politics. Women, she wrote, are as naturally rational as men. If they are silly, or you can say the stereotype concept that women are silly, it is only because society trains them to be irrelevant. This type of theoretical works by different feminists and the process of organizing the movements to achieve feminist goals took a momentum in different countries like France, Italy, UK, USA, Germany, etc. Now, if we look back to the history, feminism as an organized force dates from abolitionism in the early 1830s. We know that abolitionism was the radical anti-slavery movement which demanded the immediate cessation of slavery on the grounds that every man was a self-owner, that is, every human being has moral jurisdiction over his or her own body. It was the first organized radical movement in which women played prominent roles and from which a women's movement sprang. According to modern historian Eileen S. Creditor, abolitionists and many others began to ponder the parallels between women's status and the Negro's status. And what they noticed? They noticed that white men usually applied the principles of natural rights and the ideology of individualism only to themselves. In the United States, feminist activism took root when female abolitionists sought to apply the concepts of freedom and equality to their own social and political situations. Their work brought them in contact with female abolitionists in England who were reaching the same conclusions. By the mid-19th century, issues surrounding feminism has added to the urge for social change and ideas being exchanged across Europe and North America. Now, the history of feminism we are going to discuss systematically in 4 waves. Here in different waves we will try to understand the main objectives, related thinkers and their achievements. The history of feminist movements is divided into 4 waves. The first wave feminism started in the 19th and early 20th century. Feminists of the first wave were mainly concerned with women's right to vote. They realized that to develop the lives of women, political power plays a vital role. In the year 848, the famous Seneca Falls Convention, very important convention, was held, which marked the birth of the US women's rights movement. And for this reason, this convention is important. The convention adopted a declaration of sentiments written by Elizabeth Cady Stanton, which deliberately drew upon the language and principles of the Declaration of Independence and called almost other things for female suffrage. The movements were spreading. In UK, the organized movement developed during the 1850s. And in the year 1867, John Stuart Mill, you have heard the name most probably, John Stuart Mill, a philosopher, proposed an amendment to the Second Reform Act in the House of Commons for female suffrage, but which got defeated. After this, the British suffrage movement adopted increasingly militant tactics after the formation in 1903 of the Women's Social and Political Union, led by Emmeline Pankhurst and her daughter Christabel. Suffrage was the main goal of women's liberation in the first wave feminism in Western countries. But rights concerning property, earnings and higher education, many of which were granted by the end of the 19th century, gave women a chance for economic independence. New Zealand first introduced female suffrage in the year 1893. The year is very important. Many scholars think that first wave feminism ended with this achievement. The 19th Amendment of the US Constitution granted the vote to American women in 1920. These dates are important in the history of feminism. Second wave began in the early 1960s. After a long gap due to various reasons, the movement slowed down. It began in United States again and gradually spread throughout the Western world. The second wave of feminism referred to the ideas and actions associated with the women's liberation movement. Already mentioned the name of Simone de Beauvoir when we were discussing about gender-sex distinction. She put sex-gender distinction as one is not born but becomes woman. Means with the process of socialization, women become women as a gender. She is considered as the prominent second wave feminist. She promoted the concept of gender disparity in her writings as he is absolute, she is the other, in her book The Second Sex, which was published in the year 1949. Again, the publication in 1963 of Betty Friedan's The Feminine Mystic did much to relaunch feminist thought. Books such as Kate Millett's Sexual Politics, which was published in the year 1970, and Germaine Greer's The Female Eunuch, which was also published in the year 1970, by focusing attention upon the personal, psychological and sexual aspects of female oppression. In the first wave of feminism, the movements were limited to Western countries, but in second wave, it became a global movement. This movement addressed some fundamental issues that affect female lives. It referred to different dimensions such as sexuality, marital rape, domestic violence, reproductive rights, family, etc. It provoked extensive theoretical discussion about the origins of women's oppression, the nature of gender and the role of the family. Kate Millett's Sexual Politics made the bestseller list in 1970, and in it she broadened the term politics to include all power structured relationships and analyzed that the personal was actually political. But here one thing should be noted, that though it was a global movement, still all women could not associate themselves with these movements. As far back in 1850s, Sojourner Truth, a black feminist, had seen white feminists as incapable of understanding their concerns. Her famous "Ain't I a Woman" speech was delivered in 1851 before the Women's Rights Convention in Akron, Ohio. In the speech, Truth remarked that man over there says that women need to be helped into carriages and lifted over ditches and to have the best place everywhere. Nobody ever helps me into carriages or over mud puddles or gives me any best place. And ain't I a woman? Further, she says, I don't know that our priorities are the same, that our concerns and methods are the same. Thus, black feminists had seen white feminists as incapable of understanding their concerns. Also, in the second wave, many black women had difficulty seeing white women as their feminist sisters. In the eyes of many African Americans, after all, white women were as much the oppressor as white men. In her book, The Black Woman, an Anthology, which was published in the year 1970, Toni Cade Bambara asked, how relevant are the truths, the experiences, the findings of white women to black women? So we can see that there was a gap in different issues and positions among feminists themselves. By the end of 20th century, European and American feminists had begun to interact with the nascent feminist movements of Asia, Africa and Latin America. Many Western feminists soon perceived themselves as saviors of third world women. But they could little realized that their perceptions of and solutions to social problems were often at odds with the real lives and concerns of women in these regions. The conflicts between women in developed and developing nations played out most vividly at international conferences. For example, as the abolition of veil or purdah system got priority in the conferences for Western women, but third world women worried about other matters as their children were dying from thirst, hunger or war. As a continuation of second wave and to address the differences of different types of issues relating different areas, the third wave of feminism started in the beginning of the 1990s. This movement embraced differences, personal narratives and individualism instead of putting everyone under one agenda. They focused more on individual identity than on political changes. Gender violence has been the central issue. They want to transform the traditional notions of sexuality and focus on the feelings about sexuality. So we can say feminism as an ideology in its first wave, it was centered around suffrage and legal gains. While in the second wave, the focus was on sexuality, marital rape, domestic violence, reproductive rights, family, etc. The third wave introduced more complexity to the movement through gender equality and a focus on the individual battles women face, and gender violence has been the central issue. Though there is a debate about fourth wave of feminism, but many scholars claim that a fourth wave of feminism began about 2012 with a focus on sexual harassment, body shaming and rape culture among the other issues. In the age of constant connectivity of the internet and the strength of the #MeToo movement, a new wave of feminists are speaking out in record numbers against discrimination. With the internet connectivity, millions of women across the globe united through #MeToo movement, and they were sharing their own assault stories. The Time's Up movement bringing high-profile assault cases to the spotlight. Record number of women seek political office and leadership roles. The demand for equality, rights, equal pay is brought to the public eye and highlighted by marches across the country, social media campaigns and high-profile women taking a strong stance. So, some scholars think that this social media connectivity started the fourth wave feminism. From the entire discussion about feminism, it is clear that the main thing is there were innumerable issues and different feminists raised different issues as priority basis. In different ways, key feminists focused upon theoretical perspectives which, though different from each other in some respects, but all begin with analyzing women's subordination and conclude by providing both a theory and practice of women freedom and liberation. Hope the discussion about feminism is now clear to you. In next video, we will discuss about different types of feminism. Please like the videos and comment in the comment box. Thanks for watching.